It's my pleasure to introduce Donna Fernandes, who is not only a friend, but we are in Western New York so lucky to have Donna with us. She is, you probably know, the president and CEO of the Buffalo Zoo. She has a long history of working at zoos in Boston and in design firms. She is not only a PhD in biology, she's an expert in business, and she has completely revitalized the Buffalo Zoo, is in the process as a major player in the Western New York scene, and among other things, we're very proud to also have here as an adjunct faculty here in the Canisius Zoo Biology program. And Donna is going to try to anticipate and tell us about the demographics that we might anticipate in the future, 50 and 100 years from now. Dr. Fernandes.
Well, it was sort of difficult when Mike asked me to predict the future, but at least I love data, so I could look at sort of what the trends have been in the recent past, the last 50 or 100 years, and what some of the demographers are predicting for the future population in the United States, to try to look a little bit into my crystal ball. As Mike just mentioned, we will be living on a much crowded planet. I remember in the 60s when I was growing up, when we hit 3 billion and all the teachers telling us to, have 2 children only, or we might someday reach 6 billion. Well, on October 31st of last year, we hit 7 billion. And projections are, as Mike said, anywhere between 8 and 11 million by 2050. So we will be a much denser population. The United States has really grown a lot faster than it had originally been projected. In our most recent census, 2010 census, we hit 308 million. And that's up about 10% since 2000. And the only reason it has slightly declined in the most recent years was because of the recession. There's been a little bit less immigration. But we are the fastest growing of any industrialized nation. So we will be getting denser and denser in this country. It's predicted that we will go from 308 million to around 438 million by 2050. But more than just the increase in the numbers, we really are seeing a shift in the face of America in terms of our diversity. Back in 1960, 85% were classified in the U.S. Census as white, 10% black, and 4% Hispanic, 1% other. We've seen an incredible shift over the last 50 years and projected shifts moving forward. Currently, whites who are not Hispanic are now 2/3 of the population, and they'll drop to 46% by 2050. Hispanics, already the largest minority, will grow to 30% by 2050. African Americans will stay pretty close to, they're about 13.5 now, to 15%. Asians will increase slightly from 5 to 9%. That's really important because if you look at this room, there really isn't a lot of diversity in this room right now. You look at this table, and there really isn't a lot of diversity. I at least have a Hispanic last name, and I'm a woman, but there really isn't a lot of diversity. And we have to realize that the people we'll be attracting as our workforce and as our visitors will not look much like the people in this room today. And we have to make sure that if you're in an area now that has a high minority population, you better be pulling in equal proportion to that population as your visitors, because the biggest predictor of whether you're going to go to a zoo or not is whether you went to one as a child. So we have to make sure to capture this growing immigrant market and this greater diversity. Another big change that's happening is 50 years ago, the typical American family was mom, dad, and 2.2 children. And most likely, mom stayed at home with the kids. I mean, that was my experience. But that's no longer the case. Currently, 40% of children in the U.S. are being born to unwed mothers. That's highest in the African-American population, but rising most quickly in the white and Hispanic population. What this means is this traditional family that we sort of attract to the zoo won't be arranged that way. We'll have to do a lot more to involve unwed mothers or single parents, working parents into our programming. We have to maybe think about more opportunities for working families to come to the zoo. The average 9 to 5 weekday is not available to a lot of single parents. So we have to address that. The other thing is, traditionally we pull from a slightly affluent audience. According to AZA's website, our visitors are primarily women and mothers, 25 to 35, with a fairly high household income, 50 to 75,000. As more and more children are being born out of wedlock, unfortunately, that also is associated with lower levels of education. So it's important, if these society changes continue, that we do everything we can to accommodate a population of children who may not be growing up in educated households, and we have to make sure that they do get a zoo and science experience. Another trend we all have heard of, and all of us at the table are experiencing, the aging population. We all know that the proportion of seniors is growing tremendously, and the young people can look forward to supporting all of us in our very long old age. But it has impacts a lot on mobility. I think in zoo designs, we're starting to see it now. More and more people are coming with assisted vehicles. We have to accommodate more of these powered wheelchairs, segways, and understand that it's very important that we make older people comfortable in the zoos of the future. Another trend is that grandparents are often taking care of their grandchildren. So that's another way that we could potentially pull in a market, is rather than having the Mommy and Me programs, we should think about Grandmommy and Me programs as we start to see maybe that middle generation working and grandparents really caring for the grandchildren. There's also a trend, which sadly we have experienced great depth here in Buffalo, of a migration from the industrialized Northeast to primarily the Sun Belt area. It's happened, this graph just shows the trend in the last 10 years, but really within the last 50 years, large numbers are migrating from the Northeast to the Sun Belt areas of California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Huge growth in those areas, loss of population or stagnant populations in our areas, which obviously affects attendance and revenues, and causing increased pressure on those southern and western communities. And sadly, for those of us who grew up in a really suburban or rural life, more and more of the population is being concentrated into high urban areas. And so that is where it's also predicted to grow in the future. That's a trend around the world, but also in the United States, is that most of the population growth is in urban areas. This is just a graph showing sort of our concentration now. Obviously, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, and other sort of cities in Texas, and then Florida, huge population growths, and expected, all those orange bars are expected to be increases moving forward. So what that means is a lot of children do not grow up anymore with any kind of wilderness or wild experience in their backyard. I grew up in a very rural area, and that was my first encounter with nature. But there's going to be a generation of children growing up without nature in their backyard. And what does that mean? Well, this is sort of my take of childhood. We spent a lot of time outside, running around, unstructured play, pretty much allowed to be gone for hours on end. And that's not the case anymore. Now, if they're going to play baseball, they don't even go outside. They play Wii baseball, or they play Wii tennis, and everything's gone to sort of an indoor mode. At least in this picture, a family is doing some activities together, but less and less emphasis is being put on outdoors. And in fact, many parents don't feel the outdoor is safe. They feel that the parks are where the pedophiles are, and better that they're on computer at the safety of their home. Little do they know that's where the pedophiles are now. But it's really a change in shift from really having a relationship with nature, and obviously that was really well covered in the book Last Child in the Woods, talking about what we fear is a nature deficit disorder, and I'm sure all of us in the next 2 days will talk about the importance zoos can be in trying to fill that nature deficit. But now, even if families are outside, they're so tied in with their media that they're not even always experiencing the nature, that they're sort of there, but they're still focused in on their electronics. And as I said, you know, if you looked at historically what kinds of leisure activities there were, it was a lot of unstructured play, a lot of multi-generational activities, fishing or gardening or hiking or camping, and the family trip to the zoo. But what's important to notice is it was very much shared activities with a family structure. Now it's more organized play. Children are sort of on play dates, they're in organized soccer. There's very much less free time to just explore. It's much more programmed for children. And that's sort of, I think, impacting creativity because children aren't allowed to be children anymore. But also, the biggest change has been a shift to watching tons and tons of television. According to a recent study, in 2010, kids 8 to 18 are spending, on average, 4.5 hours per day watching TV and 7.5 hours per day plugged into media. 7.5 hours per day. And that's because you can be doing two things at once. So a lot of times they're watching TV while, you know, talking to their friends on the computer or listening to music. And so they can have multimedia that would get to that 7.5 hours. But it's a huge amount of time plugged into electronic media, certainly in a generation that has skyrocketed, and that's expected to increase moving forward with the future. That trend is only going to increase. And the other consequence that we've seen is the lack of activity has had huge effects on our weights. Sadly, obesity is a chronic problem in the United States, not only with adults, but children. And so it is going to have to be a design criteria. Airlines are looking at it. We have to recognize that benches and pathways are going to have to accommodate a much larger human body size unless they do come up with some magic pill that you can take to keep you from gaining any weight. But the projections are moving forward that the next 30 years or 20 years and into the future, the proportion of either overweight or obese is likely to just increase. And sadly, the rest of the world is catching up with us as our electronics has perpetuated throughout the globe now, and also our fast food industry. We're seeing the same trends in lots of other countries as well. The other thing, which I think is sort of a sad thing, is people are much more individualistic now. At least watching TV in the old days was a family thing. Now a computer monitor is often a solitary experience. Children younger and younger are getting plugged into these individual experiences. And so it's not so much a shared experience. People stay connected via Facebook, but they aren't even sort of talking to their mother. They might email their mother who's downstairs, or email someone who's right next door, or be in the same room and email each other. Probably those of you in the audience probably know what I'm talking about, but there really isn't a lot of one-on-one FaceTime, and that is having a serious effect on our level of integration as a society. And it's even proposed that in the future, there's this event that's coming, if you're sort of believe in what could be a very cool thing, it's called the singularity, but it's the idea that eventually artificial intelligence will become so effective that we could pretty much map the human mind and start to integrate computer circuitry into human bodies. And so maybe we could live forever. So we will be around for 100 years. You were wrong, Mike. But if that should happen and we can somehow download our memory into a electronic form, it could be immortality. I'm not sure I would actually want that to happen, but it's really hard for us to even imagine what the technology will be like. 100 years ago, you know, few people had any electricity, women couldn't vote. Now, you know, women are sort of very involved in all the areas of industry, though not well represented in this particular panel, Mike. But we really can't imagine what it will be like, and will we all be just relying on surreal experiences rather than actual tactile experiences. Another trend that we're seeing is customization, in that you want everything just for you. It started with have it your own way with hamburgers, but then Dell, you could order your own computer and you could get exactly what you wanted, which hardware, which sort of monitor, keyboard. Now you can have some cool skin to it, or a Hello Kitty skin, whatever your heart desires. But people are used to getting just what they want. They don't go over, in my day, you'd go over to someone's house and listen to records, which were albums that spun around, and you'd have to listen to the whole album. And now people just download individual songs. They have their own song. They listen to their own Sirius radio channel, so they only have to be exposed to things they like. And I think that does cause problems with being exposed to other points of view, because with enough channels out there geared to your particular interest, you can focus on just hearing what you want to hear and not have to hear anybody's contrary opinion, a different style of music. So that is something that we'll probably be adapting to. The current zoo graphic, you go up and it's designed for a 6th grade reading level or a 4th grade reading level. And I suspect in the future, people won't want to all have to read the same thing, that you'll come up with your little iPod and the graphic will automatically spew to you if you want to know house names and their weights and cute little keeper stories, and another person wants to know all about their conservation, and someone wants to know about their behavior, that it will individually download the information just that you're interested in, and people will be expecting to caterize or be able to cater to their own desire certain information and not have to see everything. So what will the family of the future be? I mean, I have also the Jetsons image here, but I don't think the Jetsons are quite correct. I mean, they're too white of a family. They're all very thin, and I don't think he's got enough gray hair, so I think that he's pretty much off, that the Jetsons family probably won't look at all like, the future family won't look at all like the Jetsons. But one thing is correct, they did expect high urbanization, high concentration of people. And that will be true. There will be high concentrations of people. And what I thought is, when we think about moving forward with zoos, we should be thinking about zoos in highly concentrated areas. And I found this was interesting. It was a competition in Buenos Aires on what a vertical zoo would be, a sort of a big, tall structure in a major city, and how could we potentially design zoos in high urban areas going vertical. So just some ideas of where we're going as a population, that we have to realize that we can't be designing for today's visitor. We have to be designing for the people of tomorrow.